My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1, and we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DTD Podcast. This week in the studio, a man who in 1964 was born in South Miami to immigrant parents. His father Russian and his mother Cuban. He was raised in a strict household that taught him if he wanted to do or be anything in life, it was on him to make it happen. Fast forward to 1984, while working as a lifeguard, he got to see his first marijuana bust, and it was at this moment that the hook was set for my guest to become a law enforcement agent. Working with Customs on the Miami boat cruise as an undercover detective posing as an international smuggler, leading an investigation into one of the biggest marijuana and cocaine trafficking cases that the Northwest United States had seen, my guest worked on the Joint Terrorism Task Force and was even the acting attaché in London, England. This week is not only about my guest's amazing career, but also the devastating loss of his son, who was killed in a U.S. Marine training incident off of San Clemente Island, where the AAV that he was riding in had a catastrophic failure and sank, trapping him inside. My guest has taken this incident and used it to help not only soldiers in the field, but to find those responsible accountable for their actions. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce you to Peter Ostrovsky. What's going on, my friend?
Hey, good evening, DJ. Thank you for that kind introduction.
Yeah,
Really appreciate it.
There is so much about you that is so crazy. The stories just of your family and youth, and that's how we always start the show. But we have to kind of set the scene. I said that your parents were immigrants, your father Russian, your mother Cuban. But to go back even further, your grandfather from Siberia taking your father to China, well, going to China where your father was born. Can we just kind of start at Siberia and move forward all the way into Cuba?
Yeah, so during the Russian Revolution, my Russian grandfather left Siberia and went to China. And that's after he was imprisoned. And they had determined that they basically wanted his skills and abilities because he was like a mining engineer. So once he was released, he basically took off and went to China. So met my grandmother, who is also Russian, in like a Russian community in China. And my dad was born in Shanghai in 1932. And they ended up moving to Tianjin, where my grandfather had a trading company with his brother. And so my dad spent his most of his entire childhood essentially in China, in Tianjin. You know, grew up in a Russian-speaking household. Of course, they had Chinese help. They had like a houseboy. They had a cook. So my dad ended up learning Chinese. He was going to an international school. He learned English at the international school. So here's a kid, by the time he's 15, he already speaks 3 languages.
Well, when you say that he spoke 3 languages as a kid, kind of fast forward real quick, you had told me that you grew up in a very strict Spanish-speaking home. And I was kind of wondering why that was set up that way, with your dad speaking 3, and I think in the end he spoke a total of 5 languages, I think, total.
Right.
Why it was so important that it be a Spanish-speaking household?
I think that was probably out of convenience for my mother, because my mother's Cuban. That was her primary language. So I think it was just easier for her. That being said, to back up some, so when my dad was 15, this is 1947, his family decides to move to Havana, Cuba, because they have the belief that that's the place to be involved in trading. So they leave China on a ship. They go to Le Havre, France, make their way to Paris. They're in post-World War II Paris for a year. My dad's going to high school there, at an international school. So now my dad is learning French because he's in Paris. But the interesting thing was his sister, my aunt, she was much younger than my father. And growing up in Tianjin, like little girls, especially little Russian girls, just couldn't be about the town like my dad was, roaming around the town as a young teenager. So my aunt only spoke Russian and Chinese. So when they got to Paris, they tried to put her in the international school, and they wouldn't admit her because she didn't speak English. So basically, she had to be homeschooled for a while to learn some functional English, and then she could go to school there in Paris. So they spent their year in Paris, and then they took another ship and went to Havana. My dad went to high school in Havana at Ruston Academy. And of course, now he's in a Spanish-speaking environment, so he learns Spanish. And he eventually met my mother, who was one of 6 sisters growing up in Havana. And they got married in 1959, kind of as everything was happening with Fidel Castro and his revolution. And a year later, they came to the United States. They initially went to Chicago. They spent one cold winter in Chicago and realized that that wasn't for them. And then they came back to Miami and linked up with my mother's sisters and their husbands. And that's where it all started for them, was in Miami, Florida.
Now, when you spoke about they moved to Cuba because they thought that's where the trade was going to be, your grandfather was going to get into the sugar cane trade business, correct?
Right. Yeah, he thought my grandfather and his brother had made an initial trip to Havana, and he was under this belief that, we can break into this industry, not realizing that, these were like large corporations, and this wasn't something for 2 guys to be just kind of freewheeling and doing their own thing and starting up their own thing. So that never really happened for them. My grandfather ended up opening an antique and art shop in Old Havana, and that's how he was making a living. As I'm told, they lived like in a rental apartment. They had used furnishings. It wasn't much to look at, but they were, living this new life and tropical Cuba.
So going all the way back to Siberia, and I need to go back because I'm trying to kind of set up how it happened in the United States. You've got Russia, China, then Paris, then Cuba. So there's a very communist background there. How did that affect your father and your grandfather? Because your grandfather, you said, was taken prisoner. How did it affect later on moving forward with their life? Were they continuously moved to communist countries. So did they still have that strong belief? Were they trying to get away from it, and that was just the easiest way to do it? What kind of set that up?
I think they were courageous in the sense that, once they did the one move, they realized that they could do it again. And then it's essentially they were fleeing countries that became communists and were looking for that new, better life. My grandmother's side of the family had a very rough life. They were in this Sakhalin Island area, and I think one of her brothers was killed when like these marauders, attacked them where they were living in this coastal town and drowned him in the sea. So, they were courageous, I would say, in a sense that they knew that they needed to seek a new and better life somewhere. And I guess once you do one move, the next move is easier, and the third move is easier, and that's how you do it.
Right. Did you ever hear your grandfather ever talk about communism, ever talk about Russia, ever talk about being in China, anything like that that you remember growing up?
Not really, no. And unfortunately, I didn't learn Russian, which when I was cleaning out my dad's safety deposit box after he passed away, I found this Patek Philippe pocket watch, this gold pocket watch with a gold chain. And I came to find out from my aunt that actually belonged to my great grandfather, who had worked for a Dutch trading company at some point and was given that pocket watch as a gift. Now, this thing I looked at it, it looked like new. It was in great condition. It had the little key where you could wind it. I wound it, set the time. It kept up accurate time. So I see the serial number on that Patek Philippe pocket watch, and I go on the internet, of course, and search for these pocket watch serial numbers. That pocket watch was from 1860. That's the year that Lincoln became president. This is incredible, incredible to think that, my great-grandfather had that. And then he passed it on to my grandfather, and my grandfather to my father. And my father never talked to me about it. It seemed that he had forgotten where he had put it. I spoke to my aunt, and my aunt had said that, oh yeah, like I asked him about it about 3 years ago where Grandpa's pocket watch was, and he kind of drew a blank. But it was in a safe deposit box, a mile from the house that whole time.
So let me ask you, with your dad moving to the United States before you're born, and I don't know if you ever talked to him about it, with him being Russian, your mom being Cuban, and at that kind of time, that moment in time, was it tough for them to be here? And what I mean by that is, by outside influences, is it tough? Is it just tough for them being here? Because your father spoke all those languages, but your mother was strictly Spanish. Was it a kind of a rough go when they first got here?
It certainly was a rough go in Chicago after living in Havana. But what I didn't tell you was that my dad had been going to college up in Montreal. So my dad knew kind of like the North American lifestyle. And so it wasn't that rough. I mean, he pretty much hit the ground running, and he worked for this company called Allied Radio as a salesman, and ended up working for a couple other companies before, at some point while I was a child, he started his own company from our kitchen table in our house, and it just grew from there. And he was selling and exporting radio broadcast equipment to Latin America and the Caribbean. So he was well entrenched in, all things Latin America, very much involved in proliferating, radio stations throughout South America, especially in Colombia. He had many clients down there: Peru, Jamaica, Central America, Ecuador, Venezuela. So, pretty much back then in the 70s, 80s, all of those radio stations were being supplied by my dad's company in Miami.
Well, it was when you and I talked before, you talked about going with your father and doing some stuff down at the docks and collecting money and stuff. And on the surface, it sounds very funny. And then when you get a little deeper, it still sounds a little funny, but I would like you to tell that story of exactly what was going on there.
Yeah, it was funny. On Saturdays when I was a kid, my dad was like, "Hey, jump in the car. We're going to go for a ride." And we drive from North Miami Beach, where we live, down to the port of Miami. And we drive like the loop by the cruise ships, and we pick up the same cruise ship worker from who was, I guess, bringing in cash payments for equipment that my dad exported to Jamaica. The cruise ship worker was like basically delivering the cash to my dad in a paper bag. And then sometimes my dad would give him like a box with transmitter tubes or, uh, you know, sundry, parts for, radio stations and whatever. So it's just kind of interesting that, here we are like picking up cash from a guy that, and I couldn't even tell you back then. I don't know what the CMIR reporting requirements were, uh, whether they even existed or not, but it was just kind of interesting. It was, I guess, rudimentary smuggling, you know.
Well, and that's what was so funny to me, and more than that, interesting to me is that where you ended up and exactly where you ended up for a lot of your career down in Miami. Um, with that, learning that from your father, though, like you said, he kind of hit the ground running, and it was always make whoever you're going to be, it's going to be you that makes you who you are. Can we talk about some of the life lessons that you learned from him, what you carried them forward in your education, and then because you had been to college and there was some stuff there, but in your job you kind of kept striving until you reached the top. So can we talk about the things that he instilled in you?
Yeah, I think again, I use the word courageous. You had to be courageous to jump on a ship and go to another country, especially like right after World War II. So I think, I kind of looked at him and would say to myself, well, if he could do it, I can do it. Um, if if uh, trying something new, following your dream, uh, was I, I don't know that he ever talked to me about that, but I kind of saw it. It was more like by osmosis that I had this sense of uh, he's like a self-made man, and I can do it too, and follow my own interests. I do know that um, they were my parents were interested in, uh, or they were hoping that I'd be interested in working for him, essentially like taking over that business. But I developed my own interests and followed my own dream, I guess. But I think that the work ethic, um, the courageousness, and becoming your own man reflected onto me. Certainly, I mean, I he didn't talk about it, but I kind of saw it and watched it and saw what you could do with yourself. And I have to say also that I kind of call myself a big daydreamer, and and I think that's part of it is dreaming. I was a competitive swimmer when I was a kid from age 6 to age 14. So, when you're chasing that black line at the bottom of the pool, your mind wanders a lot. And I think I spent a lot of time daydreaming and thinking about things and how things could be, and possibilities, whether for myself or just things that I was seeing. So, um, I would say that I'm a semi-professional daydreamer. And I think from that comes a lot of creativity, and I think it set the stage for me, like in my career, where like sometimes you had to be very creative and come up with a way to counter the bad guys, or get close to them without them realizing who you are. So I think it all kind of builds on itself, you know.
Talking about growing up, getting that from your father, the time that you spent swimming, you graduate from high school, you go to college, you join a fraternity, which you told me, by the way, that you're still banned from. We could possibly get into that, but you swam a lot in college and you started skipping classes and stuff like that. Where was that? Where was that switch flipped on you, where you were headed towards one direction and then you kind of broke off and started kind of doing your own thing?
I think it's freedom, being away from the household. Um, Growing up in a very strict household, we were expected to always behave and be on our best behavior. And, there wasn't a lot of talking in our household about like bad things that may be happening in our family. And the kids were kind of left out of a lot of conversations. And, my parents were very demanding in grade school, high school, getting straight A's, etc. I mean, I pretty much fell into going to the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida, just because my sister was already going there. And my dad was able to pay uh, for our tuition. So, although I have my suspicions about that as well, because I think my dad was actually paying my sister and I a salary from his company that we essentially used
For your college education.
for our tuition. So I guess he was trying to reduce his tax liability. So, uh, he's very creative in a sense. So I think when I got to the University of Miami, it was kind of like freedom. I was living on campus, although, it's like really the other side of Miami. It's not very far away. And I kind of like was like a free range, guy, like starting to do things if I wanted to or not, So things kind of changed for me in college. Um, I tried a bunch of different things. Like I met the Army ROTC captain. He was also like swimming and training to do triathlons like me, and he was like, "Hey, why don't you come and sign up for our Bushmaster course, this semester, and give it a go." And so like I tried that, and it was fun, but I really didn't see that was a path for me. That being said, uh, my second uncle on my mom's side,
I'm glad you
Cuban,
brought this up.
yeah, he was part of the Bay of Pigs invasion, and he was captured. So once he was released with the others, I guess the CIA must have like offered them these like packages, military careers, and he took it. And he was in the army officer, was in the Rangers, and ended up, a couple times like talking to me about, hey, I could link you up with people, and I could, if you get your degree, I can link you up with these like CIA recruiters. And so, there was a lot of influence coming in from the outside, and opportunities, I guess. But I was kind of just finding my own way. And, when I started at university, I dropped out of business administration. I kind of hated it. I was awful at math. I'm still awful at math. And dropped out of accounting, dropped out of business administration, was kind of just trying to find uh, a new program to be a part of. And then my roommate was like in this health and fitness management program as part of the School of Education. And I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. And, I like swimming and racing, doing triathlons. Maybe that'll kind of like support my habit. So I signed up and started taking classes in that program. And, eventually that's what I got my degree in, was a bachelor's of science in education in health and fitness management. Although when I was a junior, um, I started working on the beach patrol as a lifeguard on Miami Beach, working full time. And that's when I kind of started seeing things that really caught my eye. And, you know, uh, I start things that I started to dream about, possibilities for myself.
When you see that doesn't really right then, that doesn't light the law enforcement bug, or does it? Because it's not law enforcement in a sense, but you are kind of protecting over, you're on duty. Is that what's sending you down this road? Because so far up in your history, it doesn't even look like it's pointing towards law enforcement.
No, not at all. So being a lifeguard, I was also a free diver and a spear fisherman. So um, my friend and I, high school friend and I, we had bought a runabout boat that we shared, and we'd use it for water skiing and to go diving and spearfishing. And I started seeing all these like marine law enforcement boats, and in particular the Florida Marine Patrol, which now they're called something else. They're like the Florida Wildlife and Conservation Department, but FMP, the Florida Marine Patrol, we used to call them the grouper troopers, and they were like these guys in these police boats by themselves, blasting, here and there, and stopping and checking boats and checking to see if we had taken lobster legally and whatnot, and so I started seeing those uh, law enforcement agencies, and then the Miami Beach Police Department, which I worked for Miami Beach, they had a police boat, so I started seeing them. Actually, the Beach Patrol, we had our own like 25-foot Mako that was like our patrol boat that we would use as well. So I started seeing like all these boats, and then I saw like the customs boats. You know, heard the roar, the rumble of those huge inboard outboard engines, and I was like, that is something that I could totally get into. Um, Working outside, working on the water. My love of the water. So that's what really drew me to it. And then I started doing Metro-Dade Public Safety Department, because back then Miami-Dade County was called Metro-Dade County. And in the old days, it was the Public Safety Department, not the police department. So I went on some ride-alongs with Metro-Dade Public Safety, and I was like, wow, this is like a huge agency. Like, they have a Marine unit, they have like an aviation unit, they have like SRT, they've got everything, bomb squad. I'm like, this is the place that I should probably try to get into. Although I was like, at that point, starting to submit applications with all these different agencies. And then I just realized that I just needed to graduate from college. I just need to finish this degree so that I could be like a viable candidate for an agency.
Well, and you applied to multiple agencies: the Florida Marine Patrol, United States Marshals, Treasury Enforcement.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the other. I guess Miami-Dade. You applied to multiple ones. Now, you told me that it ranged from easy to hard and different stuff like that as you were going through the testing phase. But did you have an idea, because you saw that it had so many things to do, the bomb, the aviation, everything. Did you want to head towards marine life? Because it seems like when you finally go with customs, that's what you head right over to do.
Right. So I knew like Florida Marine Patrol, that's direct, like right into like a marine law enforcement job. So I applied with them. I applied with Metro-Dade because I knew that, well, after you do your time in patrol, then you can put in for these specialty units. So I was like, they're the biggest game in town, so I'm going to apply with those guys. So I did, and I took the marshals test, which was really easy. I never heard back from the marshals whatsoever. I took the Treasury Enforcement Agency exam, which was for like IRS, Secret Service, ATF, Customs. I barely passed it. You had to get a 70. I got a 71.6. I didn't expect to hear from them, but so I was kind of focused on like the Florida Marine Patrol, Metro-Dade. I was progressing through the Metro-Dade, screening, and then when I got to the polygraph, I completely failed the polygraph. And
Okay.
yeah,
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about failing the polygraph. So, of course, everybody knows it's taking a polygraph. One, it's a stressful situation. What it's supposed to do is detect, whether you're being truthful about situations that are going on. They give you a set of baseline questions and stuff. So I'm wondering what it is about that you failed so badly.
Right. So I failed it because I was truthful. I wasn't trying to deceive anybody. But basically, the polygrapher, everything was going well, and he asked me if I had ever used anabolic steroids in my past. And I was like, oh shit. And I had in college because my roommate was like a bodybuilder. And, you know, long story short, I'd taken steroids for a short period of time. So, yeah, I washed out of the polygraph because I told the truth. And essentially, that was just like an applicant killer because Miami was still reeling from the whole Miami River Cops thing and all those guys that were ripping off drug loads, and they killed a bunch of people on the Miami River. Those cops had apparently been on steroids, so that was like a screaming no-go. Like if you had any history of that, you weren't getting into a department in Miami at that point.
So you think that that was a specific question that they put in there was about that? Because, I mean, we're talking 1985, 1986, where we've talked to some other guys. We're at the height of Miami Vice. We're at the height of the cocaine cowboys. All of these things where there's so many drugs that they could have been talking about coming in, but they specifically put the steroid one in there. Do you think that was set in there to specifically rule out anyone that could possibly bring, discredit back to them again?
Yeah, I think so. I think they were just trying to make sure that they cleaned house and that it didn't happen again. They didn't want anybody on the juice, and or that had been on it. Because I guess if you're on it once, maybe you'll be on it again in the future. So yeah, that killed my my viability with Metrodade. And then I went up to Tallahassee to the state capitol for the Florida Marine Patrol's assessment, and I did pretty good because I think I had all the makings of what they were looking for. Like they had we had to do a run. I did pretty well in the run. We had to do a swim. I did really well in the swim. We had to write an essay, and the question was, why would it be beneficial for a law enforcement agency to have a health and fitness program? Well, I had just written a term paper for that in college. So I totally freaking aced that. And so I had a good sense that things were going to progress along with the Florida Marine Patrol, and that's where I'd probably end up working. That being said, when I was a Miami Beach lifeguard, we were like the second highest paid beach patrol in the country. And back then, we would laugh, but we were making I was making like $14,000 a year, which was a lot of money, like in 1985. And but the Marine Patrol didn't pay much more than being a Miami Beach lifeguard. So I kind of knew that going in, but I just so much wanted that Marine law enforcement job. And then out of the blue, one day I'm sitting in the lifeguard stand, and the lieutenant gets on the radio and he calls me and he says, "Hey, during your afternoon break, you need to call this special agent from the Customs Service at the following number." And here I am in the lifeguard stand, like I don't even have a pen or a piece of paper, and I'm like scrambling around. I grab a pencil and I'm writing the phone number down like on a bandage box, and I call this special agent during my afternoon break, and he's like, "Hey, we need to interview you for this job. You're still interested, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, customs." I'm like, "Yeah, sure." He goes, "Okay, well, we need to do an interview," and I'm like, "Well, when?" And he's like, "Well, tomorrow." And I was like, "Okay, well, I guess I'm calling in sick at the beach, and I'm going to go do this interview." And I went and did the interview, and it wasn't anything that I thought it was going to be. It wasn't about my aptitude, my interest, my perspectives on things. It was just like a background interview. Have you ever tried to overthrow the U.S. government? Have you ever used, marijuana and cocaine? Luckily, they didn't ask the steroids question.
Yeah, no shit.
And all of those kinds of background questions. And then that was it. And it was interesting because it was like a guy who was interviewing me and another guy was like watching me respond. And that was the extent of it. And
so let me ask you though, And this is where it got interesting for you. Remember, I said at the beginning, I'm going to try and tie everything together. This is what I was talking about when I talked about your grandfather and your father. So you got a grandfather from Siberia that went to China, that had a son that moved to Paris, that moved to Cuba. You had the Bay of Pigs invasion. You had all these different things. They're interviewing you for this. Does any of that come up? Because we're talking about the 80s. The Cold War is in full effect. I mean, it's a thing that is on everybody's mind. Did that ever come up in any of the questioning?
You know, it didn't. I mean, I wish it did, but it just didn't. I mean, it just seemed like there was, that wasn't like a concern, or that wasn't the purpose of recruiting me. Like I would say that I was hired solely based on my SF-71, which was like this standard government application form, and my test score, and this like background interview. There was nothing more to it. And it's kind of funny because, when you're in the feds, especially in the modern day, we have these electronic personnel files, and we can look at like all of our personnel documents. And I was logged in there one day, and I was like, oh, let me hit the back button to the first page. And lo and behold, there is my handwritten job application. I guess they scanned them all in, and it was in my personnel file still. And I'm looking at it. There wasn't much on there, like I'm a lifeguard with a PE degree, like there's not much there. And they hired me. But what I've come to find out is that it was mass hiring at that point. They needed to bring a lot of people on because of the drug war in South Florida and other places around the country. So, it's like, all right, he meets the minimum, so give him a job.
And that's what was so funny to me was because you say that it's, personal, and they're asking you, have you ever tried to overthrow the government? Have you ever done all these things? And then when it comes to where you would look at it now, looking at it in the law enforcement career you've had, okay? You've been all over the world. You've done all kinds of things in law enforcement. You're doing the interview of you. Is that something that you're going to look into?
Knowing what I know now,
Yeah.
I mean, I would ask more prying questions. Absolutely.
I mean, because
not that I was a security risk or anything like that.
Absolutely. But being in your law enforcement brain now, you looking back on it, seeing it from 30,000 feet, you've got to go, wow, they really skipped over a lot of stuff and brought me on.
Yeah. I mean, if they would have asked me, well, if you asked me today about my dad, I mean, my dad, when he was like working, selling radio broadcast equipment in Colombia, he tells me that, he was at this like Colombia National Broadcasters Convention, and they brought in the Rodriguez Orihuela brothers as like these big like philanthropists to this like conference, and they're like the keynote speakers, and they're at like the cocktail reception afterwards, and it's just kind of nuts that all of that was going on, or I guess in my background, or touch these things that actually meant something like down the road.
Yeah. Okay. So you get on with customs, you go to FLETC, you get it. You're assigned to the boat crews, correct?
Yeah. Back then it was funny because I really didn't know what I was hired as a customs investigator, and I didn't know like how you got onto the customs boats, like how that even worked. And I thought like, okay, it's probably like Metro-Dade. Like you come in, you do your time, and then you can get onto the specialty assignment. And the first day I walk in, and I'm wearing like a jacket and tie and dress shoes, and this guy that fetches me out of the lobby is like, he's like, hey, Pete, do you own any boat shoes? And I was like, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've got boat shoes. He goes, okay, well, tomorrow dress down because you're going to be working on the boats. And I was like, what? Like, holy shit. Like I hit the lottery. Like I'm starting out on the boats. It's exactly what I wanted to do. But I really didn't know like the path into that job,
Yeah,
So
you kind of fell into it with the way you did it. But I want to talk about your first boss that you had there. He was a former SF guy. And when you had gotten back from FLETC, he kind of took you. Now, he treated you, I'll let you describe how he treated you, but you said that you learned everything you know now from him.
yeah, I mean, everything I know about marine operations, and I learned from him: navigation, operating boats. Um, how can I say, having balls, being aggressive, because when you're boarding boats, you're in an environment that's sometimes it's very small, compact. I sometimes describe it. It's like doing a car stop and getting in the back seat with the people that you're stopping.
Never thought of it that
So,
way.
and they have like fillet knives and firearms and God knows what. So, yeah, really, I owe everything to him. His name is Joe Goulet. He's an Army SF guy. He's salty, surly, but taught me everything that I know um, about Marine operations. And, aside from what I learned at, the Marine Law Enforcement Training Program at FLETC that I ended up going to later on. But it's interesting because Joe, he was my first supervisor. And uh, at the tail end of my time in Miami, I went back to the Marine Group, and he had gone back there as well. And so we worked together basically as contemporaries in 1997 when I was in my last year in Miami.
So we're talking about 87 right now. What kind
Yeah.
of trouble are you seeing in 87? We've already kind of talked about the cocaine cowboys being around, but what was it set up as you jump into this? Because if you could jump into anything headlong, it would be Miami in the 80s on the boats and smuggling operations going on. So can you
Absolutely.
kind of set the landscape for what it was?
Yeah, basically, you had all these Colombian organizations that were bringing in uh, coke loads. Perhaps maybe still they were bringing in marijuana, but certainly marijuana was coming from Jamaica. But it was all coming in through the Bahamas, staging in the Bahamas, and then coming into the United States, specifically South Florida, the Florida Keys, some on the Gulf Coast, the southwest coast of Florida. Like below Naples, towards the Everglades. But it was the time to be there. Go fast boats. Just loaded to the gills with bales of marijuana. Uh, Multiple boats running together. Trying to bring in loads, and then there was us um, going out on these patrols. Uh, Customs had this Blue Lightning Operations Center, which they had like aerostat radar that was initially being used to pick up air targets that were coming from down south that were airdropping to boats. But then they, I guess, tweaked some of those radars for like maritime. There was radars on top of condominiums near the various inlets in South Florida. So like they had this radar picture uh, to a certain distance offshore, and sometimes they would, cue us to a target. Sometimes not. More often than not, the targets weren't good. A lot of the work really involved us taking our boats to areas or choke points where we knew the smugglers were maybe coming through, and running our own radar, or basically being shut down and listening for them, listening for their engines, and then using radar and night vision to chase them down and interdict them. So lots was happening, especially out of Bimini, which is 47 nautical miles from Miami. To the east, there's the Bimini Island chain, and in Bimini, it was like a hornet's nest of Bahamians that were smugglers. So a lot of stuff was going on uh, uh, through Bimini, but it wasn't just Bahamians. They were part of the picture, but then there was a lot of Americans, Cuban Americans that were involved in running fast boats from the Bahamas to South Florida. Also, there was then boats that would have hidden compartments, and the hidden compartments were typically used for coke loads, harder to see, But then there was always some pretty good telltale signs, on hidden compartments, boats that had like a tacky deck, recent fiberglass work, boats that you couldn't see into the bilge. Typically on a boat, you're going to have like an inspection plate so you can, see through the deck and see towards the gas tank and other things. So, there was like everything was going on.
So let's do an average, and then we're going to go kind of squeeze in on it. An average marijuana load that's coming in. Now, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're making stops every day. You are taking down traffickers every single day you go out on patrol.
Well, some of us are. I have to say that 2 weeks out of the academy, when I was working for Joe Goulet, we were basically on what was called Marine 3. So it was like third shift, working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So we're like midnights, graveyards. And so 2 weeks out of the academy, I'm out working a shift, and it's about 3 a.m. We get alerted by the Blue Lightning Operations Center that the North Miami Police Marine Unit has called them and says that he just chased several Midnight Express Go Fast boats out of Haulover Inlet that came in the inlet, but then when he tried to chase them down, they turned around and they exited the inlet, and he pursued them for a bit, but then he terminated his pursuit. So we responded up there from downtown through the ICW, got a quick brief from him as to what he saw, and then we just went charging 090 eastward out of the inlet. We're talking to the operations center. They're like, yeah, we have a target that's going also eastbound. We have him on radar, and he's way ahead of you, but he's tracking eastbound. So we kept pursuing him. I mean, we didn't have him in sight, but we just knew that we could be in a situation where he's going offshore to like dump the load. So we may be able to apprehend him while he's doing that, or perhaps, he's going to run out of fuel. So we're going to be able to bust him because, he's come from somewhere in the Bahamas, and perhaps, he's low on fuel at this point now that he's made it to the U.S. So, we kept running eastward. At a certain point, he dropped off a radar, and operations center said, yeah, we don't have him anymore, but last we had him, he's going east. So we kept going east, and at a certain point, we decided to shut down and just kind of see if we can hear him. And as the sun starts coming up, a Coast Guard helicopter overflies us, and he's headed eastbound. And so we're like, all right, the coasties are out looking, so maybe they're going to see bales in the water at this point, And as it got brighter, we decided that, all right, let's just turn around and go back. We'll probably find a bunch of bales in the water, and we'll recover it and just go back to the office. And as we turn around and start heading west, I look south and I see them. They're like dead in the water. And on the horizon, it's almost like a mirage, but we can see them. And they obviously saw us because as we turned towards them, they got up on plane and they continued eastbound. So we continued eastbound as well. We're chasing them, but we're still, probably a half mile behind them. And we see the Coast Guard helicopter basically must have seen us and basically starts doing low altitude harassment on those guys. And as we know now, I found out that, they were taking pictures, aerial photography of them. And as we're approaching Bimini, so at the time, we were also running an operation with our Bahamian, one of our Bahamian counterparts, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. So we had a base in Cat Key, which was about 10 miles south of Bimini. And so we had boats stationed over there, and we'd do interdiction patrols from there. But so as we're approaching Bimini, we see one of our boats that's based in Bimini is like up on the north end of the island. And they see us and they start running south. And that was my boss, Joe Goulet, who was doing a TDY over there, and another guy from our Key West office. They're running south as we're running eastward towards the harbor entrance. And when you go into Bimini, there's like this long sandbar. So you have to go around the sandbar and at these range markers and then turn left and go up into the harbor, go north. Well, Joe and this other guy that he's working with, they cut across the sandbars through what's called Suicide Cut, where there's actually a hole in the sandbar and you can only go through it when there's enough water. Otherwise, it's like aground. They go through Suicide Cut and essentially they get in front of the boat that we're chasing. So now we're all like on the harbor channel. And as we're coming closer to the harbor, all of a sudden we see this like Mako center console boat comes out of the harbor.
You got to describe what that is, though.
A Mako is like a center console fishing boat, 25 foot long with, an outboard engine, center console. There's two Bahamians on that boat, and they basically try to get in front of our other boat, which is one of these like Blue Thunders. And Joe and our other guy, Paul Lehman, they just run those guys over. The last thing I remember seeing as we went around what would be a collision is our Blue Thunder is completely on top of that Mako, and our Blue Thunder's outdrives are out of the water, and you can see the propeller spinning. And we continue chasing these guys into the harbor. They stop. Because at that point, it was going to go from bad to worse, or even worse and worse. And they gave up, and we sacked them up and took them into custody. That being said, Joe and Paul, who were on our Bahamian-based boat, did not have a Bahamian rider with them. So basically, we have a bunch of like U.S. law enforcement agencies making this interdiction and arrest, in Bahamian territory. So we quickly realized, and actually the guys that got run over, they jumped in the water like simultaneous to the collision, and they were fished out of the water, and we brought them to a dock and turned them over to some Bahamian law enforcement that were there, because obviously, like, we woke up the whole town, in the harbor when all of this happened. And we grabbed our two American guys that were on this 37-foot Midnight Express. It was empty, so they had dumped the load. But what we knew is that they had dumped the load somewhere, because those Midnight Expresses had these through-hole scuppers. So basically, water would rush. Any water that would get in the boat would run out the back of the boat into the sea. And you could see that they had like this raw water pump, electric pump that was still running. And there was a big brush on the deck. So they had basically, when we saw them, they had already dumped the load, and they were scrubbing down the deck to make sure that there weren't any marijuana seeds or marijuana debris, on their boat. And so we sacked up these guys, and we just brought them back to Miami with their boat. And, we get back to the dock, and lo and behold, all of our other customs units and Coast Guard units had found all of this marijuana in the ocean. It was 12,000 pounds that they and another boat were trying to smuggle in. That other boat was found like abandoned offshore. And it appears that either somebody picked up the operator of that boat, or maybe he swam to shore, who knows. But yeah, that was 2 weeks into the job. So for me, it kind of set the tone for my career. It's kind of like pedal to the metal. If we can do this, like violate the sovereignty of this other country and violate their laws, and nobody's getting fired. I'm like, well, I guess it's probably pretty hard to get fired from the Customs Service if you're a winner. You know, if you're a winner and you produce results.
So a lot of questions come up from that. You explained a lot of boats and stuff, but what are we talking about when you're chasing them? What kind of speed are we looking at going across the water?
Some of the faster go fast boats can do like 70. I would say that some of our boats, we were lucky if they would do 50. That's the reality of it. I mean, later on in our time, over the years, our boats have improved, and so maybe some of them are pushing 60 miles an hour, but that's pretty fast when you're on the water. To be going that.
Absolutely. So with this one, say that again.
Especially in a heavy sea,
Yeah, absolutely. So with this one, it starts at 3:00 in the morning. What time do you finish up in Bimini?
Well, it's like it's dawn.
So we're talking 5, 6, 7 hours into this.
Well, I would say that it's dawn, so we're talking. Yeah, I mean, probably about 4 hours at that point. It's summertime.
Okay. So you get these guys. You've already spent 4 hours chasing them. Everything. The load has been dropped. You bring them back. What are you thinking though? Being a new guy, because I know in law enforcement when you very first start out and you spent so much time trying to catch these guys, and then you get there and yeah, you catch the guys, but there's nothing there to take back with you. Are you defeated at all? Are you thinking it was just fun to go do this? What is it? Because I know when you very first started in this job, everything is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. It was what I signed up for, right? It was totally exciting. But that being said, the fact that they were empty didn't matter because we knew somebody would find some marijuana, right? So we would be able to basically put the load on these guys, put the case together. A case could be put together. Also, as customs officers, we have certain authorities and certain laws that, like, if you run from us, we can seize your boat. So, if we didn't get the recover any marijuana, they were still losing the boat. So that's kind of part of the drug wars, that you may not get a load every time, but you may disrupt them. You may take assets and capabilities away from them. So that's just kind of part of the whole program. Everything isn't the perfect dope case. Where you catch them red-handed. You basically take what you can get.
Yeah, absolutely. You have characterized this as the best chase of your entire 31-year career.
Well, I would say that it probably wasn't the best chase.
Oh, okay.
No, it would be what set the tone for my career, but it was a chase like none other at the time.
Okay. So let's talk before we move on. Best chase of your career.
Best chase of my career, I would say that 1997. I'm back in the Marine Group. We're working these Bahamian smugglers again, and we're basically going out like on a cold patrol one night, a bunch of our boats. No, actually, let me back up. We had information, so basically somebody let us know that a certain smuggler was coming across that night, so we were basically going out to find him. One of our boats finds him. Guy turns around. He's going back to Bimini. It's like a 27-foot twin outboard go fast boat. There's 4 people. No, is there 4? Yeah, there's 4 people on board when the chase starts. One of our boats chases them probably like halfway back to Bimini, like 20 something miles offshore. And bad guys, all of a sudden, they slow to what we would call like full clutch ahead. And what we came to find out is they developed a vacuum in one of their fuel lines for one of the outboards. So they're only able to run on one. So they are continuing their flight, but they're like on one, it's pegged, but their boat is like bow high, right? Because they can't get it on plane. And so our guys are radioing to the rest of us, hey, you know, we're chasing so-and-so, and I don't want to say his name because, he's a Bahamian smuggler, well-known, notorious smuggler. We're chasing him. He's now throwing, it's like a slow pursuit. It would be like the OJ chase, right? It's like a slow pursuit. And he's radioing to us that they're throwing luggage overboard. So we know the luggage probably contains some kind of contraband, coke or marijuana. And so I'm responding to the scene. I'm the passenger in one of our boats. My partner is driving. We're responding to the scene. And we had, in our time, we had developed all kinds of what I would call unconventional tactics to stop people when they were fleeing from us. So if you had outboard engines and you were fleeing from us and we could catch up to you, we'll crash into your outboards to disable your boat. So that was one of our tactics. And crashing into them with the bow of our boat really wouldn't damage our boat much. It was more like cosmetic if we did something like that. So I'm responding into the area with my partner, and he decides that he's going to take a shot at this bad guy's outboards on the first pass. And he misses, and he puts our boat into a sharp turn, and basically we end up doing like a 180 and place ourselves in front of this bad guy. And the bad guy crashes into us. But at that point, I had gone forward onto the deck of our boat with a shotgun, with a Remington 870, because I was just like, all right, I may use disabling fire and shoot at his outboard engines, which we weren't supposed to do. But I was like, I'm going to put myself in a position. If I need to, I will. And bad guy crashes into us, and that boat missed me by 2 feet. To the point, DJ, that I still don't know to this day whether the boat's hull knocked the shotgun out of my hands or if I dropped it and the shotgun just flew and went overboard into the ocean. We never recovered that shotgun. So I can't tell you, but I basically saw the boat crash into us. I dropped down to the deck and I look up and I'm looking at the hull, the bottom of that boat. It's over top of me. That boat slides off of ours, and by golly, they fucking keep running. They keep going. Bow high on
at a slow. They're still going slow though, right?
Still slow. It's like the OJ chase, slow. They keep going, and so I get up onto my feet, and I'm pissed at the bad guys. I'm pissed at my partner, for what happened. And all of a sudden we hear, help, help. And I'm like looking at my partner. I'm like, holy shit, somebody fell in the water. And we use our spotlight and we're looking around and we see a guy, and it's one of the smugglers off the boat. During the collision, he fell off and he's in the water. So I'm like, well, we got one of them, like now we got 3 more that we need to go sack up. And our other boat continued the pursuit, and basically we bring that one guy on board, we put a life jacket on and we handcuff him. And I told my partner, I'm like, hey, catch up to the chase. I'm like, we this has got to end here. And I told him, I said, pull up alongside And as soon as you're alongside, I'm going on board. Like, even if we're all still moving, I'm like, I've had enough of this shit. And so we pull on board and we pull alongside, and I jump on board, and immediately the driver of the boat is like yelling at me. He's like, "Get the fuck off my boat. We're going back to Bimini, fuck you." And I'm like, "No, shut off your boat." I'm like, "We're finished. Like, shut off your boat." And he's like, "No, fuck you." And but then when I'm on the boat, I'm looking and I'm like, so there's a guy behind the wheel driving. There's a guy, a younger guy, sitting on this bench seat in the back. But then there's still the third person's missing. Like, where's this other person? So I'm thinking, shit, did two guys go overboard? And we only got, we only rescued and arrested one. There's still one out there. And as I'm arguing with this, the driver of the boat, I'm looking on the console, which would be like the dash, but on a boat it's a console, for the keys, because all I have to do is shut the keys off, and I'm like, it's dark, because again, we're what I failed to say is, like, it's nighttime. We're talking, it's like 1 a.m. We're 20 something miles off of Miami. It's dark. I don't have a flashlight at that point. But so I'm looking on the console, where are the keys? Because I know all I have to do is turn the keys off. And I'm slapping at things that I think are the keys. And I grab this one thing, and it's like a phone charger, like in a lighter plug. And I throw that to the deck, and I'm like looking around. I can't see where the keys are. And the kid that was on the back seat, he gets up and he's like, and he yells at me, like charges at me. And I turn and I throw a punch, but like I punch early and I hit him like in his Adam's apple, like, the top of his chest, like right in his Adam's apple, and knock him down. And at that point, I'm like, all right, I've just had enough with this guy that's driving the boat. And I just turn and I crank back and I just give him like a temple punch, and I just knock him out. And that was it. The funny thing is that he was leaning up against where the keys were, because they were part of the throttle. Like some of these Evinrude type throttles, like the ignition key is part of the throttle. So he was blocking it with his body. So I would have never gotten to the keys. But even the funnier part of the story is that this particular smuggler, this Bahamian smuggler, had one leg. And he was famous for it because he had been involved in this motorcycle accident, had one of his legs amputated below the knee. So after I knock him out, I'm looking around on the deck as I'm cuffing him. I see this wooden leg with this Nike sneaker on the deck. And so, you can only imagine that later on, everybody was like, oh man, he hit him. He punched him so hard that he knocked his leg off, and all this stuff, all the stories. But the truth was that he would take it off when he would drive the boat, because otherwise he couldn't sit in this little chair at the helm station, because that mahogany leg, didn't articulate. It was just like a straight thing. But
like a real pirate leg.
Yeah, wooden leg. And so, some of our other guys recovered all the dope, it was marijuana. And, again, sacked up all the dope, and brought them back to Miami and prosecuted them all. So, but what I was going to say, the third guy.
Okay, yeah.
The third guy was not in the water. As I'm cuffing these other guys, our other boat that initiated the pursuit, they go, hey, there's one down below in the cabin. And I was like, what? Are you like serious? And so at that point, I open up like the little cabin door and stick my head in there. And it's a 14-year-old kid, the son of the guy that fell in the water, was down below, shaking like a leaf, wearing some mirrored sunglasses, and we dragged him out of there and sacked him up too. So.
Well, that's what you want, is mirrored sunglasses at 1 o'clock in the morning. So, exactly. Moving away from Miami now, do you ever think that you're going to leave Miami? Because I don't think you could have taken a more different turn in your career to where you went.
Yeah. Well, I would have to say that, I started seeing the country because my girlfriend, who now my wife, was a flight attendant. So we did quite a bit of traveling in our off time. And we saw the Pacific Northwest, and we pretty much like fell in love with it, and realized that, we were skiers. We were doing some mountaineering. We were doing some backpacking and backcountry backpacking and camping and stuff. And we realized that we wanted to be somewhere where the great outdoors was our backyard. And believe me, I had enough of South Florida at that point. Spent my whole life there. Frankly, I never lived outside of South Florida until I went to FLETC. So now I was kind of seeing the rest of the country, and we kind of put our sights on the Pacific Northwest. That's somewhere where we would want to be together.
Well, and I don't just mean more different from, of course, because you're going from Miami, sun, beaches, the smuggling there is coming through boats off the islands. But I'm talking about just general weather, different political environment. I mean, it couldn't be more different. So when you set your sights on there and you go there, are you ready to kind of slow down? Because I feel like looking at it before you tell the next thing of what you did, looking at it, you've got to be thinking, all right, it's going to be a little slower than what was going on in Miami. So are you looking to kind of slow down in your career? Are you looking to kind of start taking it in, or what's going on as you move there?
Yeah, I'm looking to, Miami's now becoming like a monster. There's a lot of people there. I'd worked pretty hard my 10 years while I was there. I also was assigned at the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and we were working all of these anti-Castro militant groups, and using our customs export enforcement authority to disrupt a lot of these activities that these guys were engaged in. Wherever I worked, I was always very active. Prior to that, right around the time when I got married, I was a primary undercover agent on a large-scale coke smuggling case where I was the primary, dealing with these like Cuban American lobster fishermen that were smugglers, and a Colombian guy, and I was posing as the boyfriend of this woman. She was an informant that was trying to work off a beef because her husband had gotten sacked up by us on a different deal. So now she's trying to work for us to get him like a 5K, sentence reduction. So I was involved in a lot of stuff, and I think I chased every opportunity that was available to me. I chased it, and I put all of myself into it, and I think it was because of my desire to experience all these different things, and kind of make something of this opportunity. So I wouldn't say that I worked myself into the ground, but I worked pretty hard, and I was just looking for something different, kind of like South Florida's like been there, done that, how many more reefs can I dive on? How many more fish can I spear? Spent a lot of time on the water. Yeah. Grew up there. I was kind of like finished with it in a way, now that I saw what other parts of the country had to offer. And I kind of knew that because I was like a self-made guy that I could probably succeed anywhere I landed, just as long as I kept working hard, and dedicated myself to my work.
I think more than that, though. You've already been married once. You've been divorced. You're dating your now wife. Is it taking a toll on your personal life?
I think the personal life, we didn't we didn't envision having a family in South Florida, you know,
Okay.
for everything that we knew about South Florida, you know. Um,
Okay.
so it was really more the environment than the work, because, you know, when I showed up in Blaine, it was pedal to the metal, you know, in Blaine, Washington.
Absolutely.
And we did some things in Blaine that have never been done, you know, in federal law enforcement. We were the first people to do it. So, um, you know, I think it was just, is more about the environment. Just kind of had enough of Florida, been there, done that, you know, time to go try something else, you know, and, and I would say that, you know, I got as much out of my career in Miami than I could, and I think I was actually pushing my luck towards the end. I'd been very successful, and then, you know, you get involved in a boat crash, and you um, get involved in some other boat chases that involve crashes, and you see things, and you know, get hit by the splatter of gunfire, and, you know, it's like, well, I think that your luck's going to run out, you know, at a certain point. I thought, you know, in my mind, so it was time to try something different, or try somewhere different.
Okay. So going on that, so we go to Blaine, but you say it's right back to pedal to the metal. So it seems very. It seems kind of two ways when you say it. It's confusing because you say that you see these things, it's time to step away from that, but then you get to Blaine and you go right back into it.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's the challenge, you know. I guess, you know, maybe because, like, I was a childhood swimmer, like, I've always been very competitive, and swimming is really about outdoing yourself. You know, it's you and your lane, and maybe that's like a mentality that I've always had, is that what am I going to do now to outdo myself? So, yeah, I get to Blaine. It's kind of a sleepy office, as my old special agent in charge had told me. She was shocked that I even wanted to go there, um, and she even offered. She's like, because she was leaving Miami. Bonnie Tischler, she's going to be the SAC. She was the SAC in Miami. She was going to be the assistant commissioner for investigations in headquarters. And when I told her that I was interested in going to Blaine, Washington, she's like, "What, Peter Ostrovsky, are you like out of your mind? That's like a nowhere office. There's nothing going on there. You'll never get promoted if you go up there. Why don't you come with me and a few other people that I'm that I'm taking to headquarters, and you know, you'll be able to you know, progress in your career." And I was like, you know, thanks, but no thanks. You know, no, don't mean any disrespect, but, you know, I kind of want to, you know, get to a different kind of place to live. You know, don't want to be in DC. I want to go to like a small town environment. And lo and behold, 30 days later, I get a directed reassignment letter to Blaine, which is like unheard of when you're GS-13. You know, typically paid moves are only for people that are getting promoted or going to headquarters. So I got a paid move to Blaine, to this sleepy little 16-man office, which back then you had to compete to get a GS-13, right? So everybody, you know, can make GS-12 just by having time off, but you had to compete to get a 13. So here I am. I arrive in Blaine, Washington, and I'm taking a spot that one of those guys could get promoted into. So I didn't get a very warm welcome when I got to Blaine, but you know, I ended up. It's kind of interesting because there was two groups in Blaine: the drug group and the non-drug group. And I got assigned to the non-drug group, which was fine because I'd work, you know, exports and you know, other things other than narcotics in South Florida. So, but then I was told, oh yeah, you're in the non-drug group, but you and your partner, Andy Poor, who Andy was a former customs inspector, you guys are going to respond to every drug seizure at the land border ports of entry so that the drug guys can work long-term cases. And so on its face, that sounded like a shit assignment, right? Like an awful assignment, but it was actually an awesome assignment because we got to do like all of these like interviews, controlled deliveries, cold convoys. I mean, it was just like action-packed work. And, and our mentality was that if the customs inspectors at the border caught somebody, like our job was like, all right, they did their job. They got the guy and they got the load. Now our job is to get the guys that this guy is working with, downstream. Where's this dope going to? Who else is involved? So we did. I mean, I've lost count the amount of controlled deliveries that we did from our work at the ports of entry there in the Blaine area. And back then, that was the beginning of the BC Bud days. So the Canadians were making, their domestically grown, high potency marijuana. So, it was kind of interesting. So I get there in 97. A big load is like 5 pounds of BC Bud, which its value was like at 3,000, I mean, what I would say, like conservatively, some people say, oh no, it was fetching like 6,000 in LA. I don't know. I don't believe that, but I would say 3,000 is a good number. So, 5 pounds, was worth something. And then, the size of the loads just started growing, exponentially, the next thing we know, we find a hidden compartment in a pickup truck, 70 pounds. Next thing is commercial trucks, with hundreds of pounds of BC Bud, concealed in the trucks. So, it certainly was the place to be working. It was a good assignment.
Well, so what I want to ask you though, a way I think that a lot of the general public looks at the border, they see the southern border, and they think, that's where the noise comes from. They know that drugs are coming across there. Then you look at Miami, where you were. They know about the cocaine coming in. No one really thinks about the Canadian border up north.
Right.
Do you think that when you start seeing this marijuana grow exponentially, it's because these smugglers are thinking the border's not that covered, it's going to be a lot easier to get this across? What do you think the reason was that it grew so quickly? Because as we'll talk about with Operation Frozen Timber, it grew like crazy overnight.
Yeah, I think it was just the opportunity. What you got to understand about Blaine, Washington, and so British Columbia was like the breadbasket for all of this marijuana. That's where it was all being grown. British Columbia also is festooned with like all of these criminal organizations. You've got the Hells Angels, you've got Persian organizations, you've got Vietnamese organizations at the time. So there's all kinds of criminals there who've always been involved in some kind of trafficking activity. So I think what they found was that BC Bud was low risk, high profit for them. The border isn't as secure as the southern border. Literally, there is no border fence. It's pretty much, or any fencing whatsoever. There are some spots on the border between Washington and British Columbia where it's just like a 3-foot wide ditch. Some places you can just drive a car across it. So there was a lot of opportunity for smuggling and not a lot of opportunity to make money. So you have like 4 ports of entry, land border ports of entry, all kinds of vehicle traffic, commercial truck traffic coming through 2 of those ports of entry. It's where the water meets. So there's like this maritime border. The Canadian Gulf Islands are San Juan Islands abut each other. There's mountainous terrain. There's between the ports of entry, there's all these wide open agricultural areas. It's just wide open. And then when you start talking like small planes, helicopters, There's no radar coverage up there. I mean, the FAA can see jets, at 5,000 feet, but there's no coverage, down even to the mountaintops, um, uh, or the hilltops in some of those areas. So it's just wide open, big time opportunity. People wanted that product. But what we came to find out was that a lot of the Canadian DTOs were really not marijuana organizations. They were just using marijuana as a means to generate illicit proceeds in the US so that they could buy coke loads to smuggle the coke loads to Canada, right? So they really weren't marijuana guys. They were really, some of them were coke guys. And you would hear them on wires like, yeah, I need to flip that so that I can get what I need, which is like, get the coke. And so, it got to a point where, this whole myth about 9/11, like, oh, more border enforcement, this and that didn't slow these guys down whatsoever. Because when you have, wide open areas of border, they're going to go to the path of least resistance. And if there's no detection and monitoring or any kind of queuing, they're literally, doing the crime in front of the police station, that kind of uh, mentality. So what we also saw was that eventually the Canadian organizations were really just using America as like a bridge to the Mexican DTOs, the Mexican cartels. They were using like our transportation infrastructure, our communications infrastructure, and this is where all the deals would happen, or the exchanges of product and proceeds for product were happening in America. And you would have Canadian DTOs dealing with Mexican cartels directly, not involving a single US person. So, we saw this evolve over time.
So let me ask a question though. When you say 9/11 happened, and you say that they talked about strengthening up the borders, tightening them up, as we've seen at 9/11 and afterwards and even before, a lot of terrorists were coming through the northern border. So if we know that they're coming through the northern border, we know that there is that bridge now between Canadian DTOs, Mexican DTOs, with no Americans being involved. Why do you think that there was no measures taken to seal up those borders? Or even an additional question to that would be, why continue to tell everyone to focus on the southern border when our northern border is just as heated up as the other one?
Yeah, yeah. It's a great observation on your part. I think it's the difficulty of securing the northern border. And you would say, what? What do you mean the difficulty? Well, you have like the Cascade Mountain Range. So, I mean, you have like backpackers, smuggling loads, hiking through these mountain trails. Very difficult to detect, very difficult to interdict. Again, the air smuggling, very difficult to detect those aircraft and then get queued and then put an interdiction asset on it. Same thing out in the water. I mean, some of the distances between the Canadian islands and the U.S. islands are just like just a little over a mile. So you can imagine, and what we came to find out in our investigations is that some of the maritime organizations would basically put spotters on these like hillsides and look across from their islands into our islands. And when they would see that like a Coast Guard boat or a CBP boat would like leave the area, um, then they would send their boats across with the loads. And basically, it's like a speed, time, and distance equation. They could transit and get across and get to one of the islands before one of those assets could respond back and interdict them. So the northern border has its challenges. That being said, the Border Patrol really beefed up. When I got to Blaine, there was probably 35 of them in the Blaine area. By the time I retired, um, in 2018, there was probably like 360 Border Patrol agents in the
Wow, that's a
Blandy.
huge increase.
Yeah, it's enormous, and really, and that's for an area between the ports of entry that's like 14 miles from the shoreline where the border goes into the water to the western slope of the Cascade Mountains. So that's not like a very large area, and there ended up being over 300 agents there. So the Border Patrol beefed up their personnel. As a result of some of our investigations, CBP Air Marine finally in 2004 put a Air Marine branch there in Bellingham, which we worked very closely with them, and they were integral partners in frozen timber when we did that operation.
Well, you bring that up. Let's talk about Operation Frozen Timber. Now, someone from your organization said, and I don't have exactly who said it, but they said they literally took cross-border smuggling to new heights with this case. You had seen everything coming in from the Bahamas. You had seen crazy things down in Florida. This, to me, when you told me about this, you sent me the video to watch, all that kind of stuff, the B-roll stuff that the media had, is insane. They're flying helicopters in the middle of the day to national parks, open ranges, and dropping these. So if we can first talk about how we set up Frozen Timber and then how we move through the case.
Yeah. So in 1999, we worked one helicopter case with the Organized Crime Agency of British Columbia, which is a provincial agency. And they had a target that was, he had a Eurocopter on his property, and he was supposedly taking flying lessons. And they had put some surveillance aircraft on him and saw him fly into the mountains, into the Cascades. And, like 40 minutes later, he flew back to his property. So we got a tip on that guy. And so the big question was, where was he going? We did not have a CBP Air Marine branch in our area at the time. So we called our interceptor jet from San Diego. And we were able to identify an approximate area in the national forest where this guy had landed. Basically, bad guy left. RCMP members followed him in their plane to the border. Our jet picked him up. Guy was flying under cloud cover. Our jet had to fly at a much higher altitude because, they can't fly in the clouds. You can't fly VFR, when you can't see. So our guys are above the clouds, running radar, and they put him to a certain area near Baker Lake, Washington, in the Mount Baker National Forest. And so we set out in our vehicles subsequently because, we didn't catch him when he ran the load that time. And we started looking for likely places that this helicopter could have landed. And we found this gravel pit that was up on this mountainside. And I'm walking in the gravel pit with my partner, and we're looking around, seeing if we can see the skid marks from the helicopter, like in the dirt or anything. And we had been told by our Canadian partners that the bad guys were always going to like this superstore and buying these cheap pieces of luggage, and they suspected that the loads would be in luggage. It's like this cheap Chinese luggage that you can buy at like a superstore. And I'm walking through that gravel pit, and I look down, and what do I see? A little Chinese luggage lock. And I turned to my partner and I said, "This is it." And he goes, "What do you mean this is it?" I go, "This is the spot." And he goes, "How do you know? Maybe somebody dropped that there." I go, "No, but," I go, "This is not, like, I'm a freaking backpacker and a hiker. This is not like what you would use, for recreational activities." I go, "It's a Chinese luggage lock." I go, "This is where they're landing." And so long story short, we worked that case. We found an observation post point, and we were able to watch that helicopter come in a couple times, and then we had state and local units roadkill them on a car stop, and it was under our authority. It was essentially a customs border search, but because it was an aircraft coming from foreign, dropping, didn't clear customs, dropping packages to a vehicle, our search authority extends until if we keep continuous surveillance, our search authority is intact. So we roadkilled them, and they ended up taking down. We seized the dope. They took the guys down on the north side of the border, took down the helicopter. So the smuggler that was involved in that case in 1999, in 2004, November, his roommate shows up at the border, at the land border, and my guys respond up there to follow him because it's an associate of an old case. They're going to follow him out of the port of entry and see where he's going in his vehicle. And in his vehicle, he has a sat phone and he has a map for the Okanagan National Forest. Well, at that time of the year, in order to drive to that spot, you have to drive 5.5 hours because the nearest road is closed because of snow on the road. So we followed that guy, and that guy was basically kickstarted frozen timber. He and others, we started following other associates over to the Methow Valley, which is in the Okanagan National Forest, which is the eastern slope of the Cascade Mountains, 20 miles south of the border. And we started following guys over there. We started using tracking technology on some of their vehicles to determine where these vehicles were going in the forest. And so basically it was like this step-by-step process. We're building our intel picture as to what was going on and where these guys were doing what they're doing. And what we found out was that often these offload vehicles would, these guys would cross the U.S.-Canada border coming south, like in their own car. They would go to a location, rent a vehicle, typically like a minivan, and then we would put some technology on that minivan when they weren't looking, and then we would determine where they had gone in the forest. And we started identifying all of these suspected landing sites where those vehicles were going. We started seeing a pattern, never on a weekend because there's like recreational people out there, typically Tuesday through Thursday, and the vehicles would be at these locations where you could land or hover a helicopter at like first light. In the summertime, first light in the Pacific Northwest is 4:30. So sometimes we would see that these vehicles would actually spend the night at these locations, and then they'd be gone in the morning. So after we identified some what we would consider decent locations where there was activity, we put some remotely activated video surveillance systems there, and we started gathering video, which is some of that video that you saw in the B-roll. It's black and white, but it is, if you look at the clock, it's all typically like 4:30 in the morning in the summertime. So we basically started developing a picture. Okay, what kind of aircraft? How are they doing it? Some of them were sling loads, a Robinson R-44 with a sling load, dropping the duffel bags of marijuana to an awaiting vehicle. Some was a jet ranger coming in with like what they call tundra baskets underneath the skids, loaded with hockey bags of marijuana and being offloaded. So, once we kind of built the picture as to what was going on, then we started running surveillances, putting our own guys in the woods, trying to get some handheld close-in videography of what was going on. And then when the bad guys would come in, we started following them out. And, we built partnerships with U.S. Forest Service, law enforcement, the Washington State Patrol, obviously CBP Air Marine. We were using one of their new planes, which is was a Pilatus PC-12. If you're in the Air Force, you'd know it as a U-28. It's a low wing, turboprop, single engine, but it's a surveillance bird, that we'd have it up, close to 20,000 feet. Same camera system as a Predator, and shooting video as to, bad guys flying in, offloading, then following the vehicle away. And what we would do is, working with our state patrol unit, we'd follow them for 4.5 hours, well away from the border, down to like I-90, down I-5, and then under our authority, we'd have the state patrol roadkill them, and we'd seize the loads. We'd exploit their phones, exploit their GPS, and essentially continue to build our case on these guys. But having this creative flair that I say that I have, we figured out how to roadkill these guys, but then cut them loose. And we would make it look like the troopers did a bad search, an illegal search. We would roll in as investigators that these state troopers have called, not identifying ourselves as special agents, but we would basically make the bad guys think that we had no idea that this load came in a helicopter. We tell them, hey, a load this big, we're talking like 900 pounds of BC bud flown in via helicopter, like 3 consecutive flights. The helicopter dropped 300 pounds, went back to Canada, picked up 300, came down, dropped 300, went back, picked up 300, dropped, total 900. So we would tell the guy, hey, we know a load this big came in via a commercial truck. Where'd you meet the truck? What truck stop? What'd the guy look like? Blah, blah, blah. So we sustained our operation by using this, sleight of hand and a little bit of trickery, and essentially cut people loose. But all in all, at the end of our operation, we ended up, charging like 40 people and arresting most of them. So that's how we furthered our investigation and sustained this operation, was by using that little bit of sleight of hand and not letting them know that we knew where all those landing sites were. And a lot of people would ask me about frozen timber and say, wow, you must have had tracking devices on those helicopters. And I was like, no, we didn't have any tracking devices on bad guy helicopters, because they were all coming from Canada, and we didn't even know where they were coming from in Canada. But we knew where to find the offload crews, and so we would follow the offload crews, and the offload crews would show us what aircraft it is and what's going on.
Guessing with how you did that, because you were making educated guesses, putting all the pieces together. If you can, a percentage of how many loads you think you lost. We never lost a load that we were following out. I can tell you that. No. That's not what I mean.
Or that we missed.
That you missed, that were coming thin, that maybe you didn't get the landing site. I'm looking towards, like, do you think there were more landing sites that you guys didn't know about? Was there stuff that, I guess that's the right word, missed or didn't know that those loads were coming in? You know how they say down on the southern border they get however many percentage, and then another gets across by what you're stopping. How do you think it worked up there?
Well, I can tell you that there was one smuggler that essentially, at his property, he had 4 Robinson helicopters and a Jet Ranger, and he was working for multiple organizations, and like the aircraft belonged to different Canadian organizations. So he was very active, just that one guy, that one Canadian smuggler. And then our investigation, our exploitation of like GPS devices surveillances, we identified 16 landing sites just in the Okanagan National Forest near Winthrop, Washington. But I can tell you that in our time of, of activity where we followed loads out, we only followed loads out from 5 sites. So
wow.
These guys enjoyed a lot of success prior to us getting onto them. Then there was a couple of sites in Western Washington, but the majority of these loads were coming into Eastern Washington on the eastern slope of the Cascades. So I think they were highly successful prior to us, ruining it for them.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point of it, was where I was leading with the question was, do you think that getting away with that at those other sites and stuff, do you think that became their downfall? Because do you think that they ever got sloppy in the operation?
Well, in a way, there was some sloppiness because they would leave evidence they had that there was activity at the site. So, like sometimes we would find like a fire ring, and what
Okay.
would we find in the fire ring? A half burned up satellite phone box, like when they bought a sat phone, or we would find the buckles from the ratchet straps that they would use to put the hockey bags together and suspend them from the helicopter. So I guess they were using the nylon to start a fire, when they were occupying some of these landing sites overnight. So in a sense, they were sloppy that way.
Mm-hmm.
We also found that if you walk the perimeter of a site, like you walked into the woods, you'd find their garbage. You'd
Where
find,
they're trying to, they're just not good at hiding it.
yeah, they're just not doing a good enough job at
Right.
hiding their garbage. So you would find like ratchet straps that have been cut because they wouldn't, to undo these bundles, they wouldn't like undo the ratchets. They just use a knife and cut them. So they
Right.
would throw the ratchet straps in the wood. So you'd find evidence of that. You'd find like their clothes. Like some of these guys, I guess, were living out there for a while, and you'd find like their dirty underwear and dirty t-shirts and stuff that they'd dumped. So in a way, they were sloppy in that sense. But
Right.
they had a system set up, and some of the guys were had these pretty good systems where they would have like what they called the guy meeting the helicopter was the catcher. So he'd catch the load, like receive it from the helicopter. Then they'd have another guy that was called the blocker. And the blocker's job was to basically do counter surveillance, be down a ways down the forest road, or perhaps even block the road and pretend his vehicle's broken down to ensure that uh, Joe Citizen or law enforcement was going to come up into the area and disrupt their activities. So some of them were smart that way. Some of them also were smart in that they used different kinds of visual signals. So when the helicopter was coming into land, let's say, for example, if the driver's door to the pickup vehicle wasn't open, that would mean that that's not their guy, that it's not safe to come in. They would use all different kinds of systems to do what they were doing. But I would say that they were very successful. And we were very successful too. Why? Because I always say we're winners. We don't like to get beat, and we're very competitive, and they're the opposition, and we're going to find a way to get our man. And I think that's one of the themes for what I'm talking about is that I think that's kind of like the spirit of people that chase smugglers and chase contraband is that you're going to find a way to get your man. You're going to find a way to get the load.
Yeah. I would say you were very successful too. 40 people arrested in the United States, 2 attorneys included in that were doing money laundering for them, 6 arrested in British Columbia, 4 tons of marijuana, 800 pounds of cocaine, 1.5 million in cash, 2 helicopters, and 1 plane seized. I would say that's a very successful operation.
Yeah, yeah, and the fact that we were able to actually seize a helicopter in the U.S. in the act was was kind of like a fluke, but we were prepared to do it. I have to say that a couple of the smugglers killed themselves in Canada flying. These guys were not licensed pilots. They were taught how to fly helicopters. So, one guy rolled over a jet ranger, taking his girlfriend for a joyride. He was a smuggler and killed her. And then the guy from the 1999 case, he actually was active again during Frozen Timber, and him and another pilot burned in, and killed themselves in Canada. But I had my guys like under strict orders that when we were like to the point where we had guys hiding in the woods doing videography, you were never to approach a running helicopter if the pilot's behind the controls, because he can easily just roll it over on its side, and as rotor blades going flying everywhere and causing mortal injuries. So my guys were under those orders that if the pilot's behind the controls, do not approach a running helicopter, because sometimes the catcher would just come up and just take the stuff, and the pilot would stay behind the controls, ready to lift off at a moment's notice. And some of these offloads, they could occur in as little as 40 seconds to like 2 minutes. So it's a very short window for like my guys to like think that they can charge out of the woods and like approach these guys and take them down. But there was this one instance where our guys were in the woods, pilot got out, he's helping the catcher unload this Robinson that had these like side pods, and then the pilot in the co-pilot seat had a like a hockey bag strapped in, so he was like helping offload, and that helicopter was running at ground idle, and our guys rolled out of the woods and came up behind them and took them down. And it was kind of funny because the catcher thought that it was the blocker playing a joke on them, a prank, saying like, police get down. Like they never thought that they would be caught. And he ended up telling us later on, he's like, man, you guys have like the coolest job ever, And I was just like, well, it's because of you guys, I guess we have the coolest job ever.
Yeah, no kidding.
But yeah, so that we were fortunate that we were able to seize one helicopter ourselves on the U.S. side of the border.
Well, I think it was a very successful operation, and I think it was. I love in your career how you saw both ends of the spectrum. You saw coming in from South America, you saw the boats, and then you saw something that I don't think a lot of people know about. I really don't think a lot of people know about the northern operations that are going on. And I love how it kind of bookended your career, starting in Miami, ending there, and doing the things that you did. Now, you did some other things. Is there anything that you wish that you maybe would have done, or was it was the career that you wanted?
I think I got my arms around as much as I could. The only type of case that I never worked that I always wanted to work was like these big mothership cases like in the Pacific Ocean. But like those cases had really ended by the time I got to Blaine. They used to have like coming from Thailand, these ships with like marijuana loads. They'd be offloading on the Washington coast, Oregon coast. And I was always interested in doing one of those cases, but I never did because I kind of missed the window. Just like I always joked that, I was going to be the first federal law enforcement officer on the space shuttle, but, they canceled the program before, I was ready to go. So
I would love to see how customs operations go there.
Yeah. But yeah, I think I got as much out of it as I could. And I think, when I look back, shoot, if I could do it, a guy that was like a Miami Beach lifeguard with a physical education degree, anybody can do it. You just have to apply yourself. You have to have good work ethic. and I think you have to have a good imagination and creativity, especially when you're taking on challenges that other people say it's like, this is impossible. You're not going to be able to do this. And I was like, I was always had this attitude like, oh, challenge accepted. We'll figure out a way to do it. I remember there was an RCMP officer, because they have like officers and like enlisted. And there was an officer when we started Frozen Timber was telling me, he's like, you guys are just going after these like, these little guys, these blockers and catchers. And I was like, well, that's how we work. We work from the bottom up, and, that's otherwise, if we don't work it that way, then we're not working them,
Absolutely.
They're going to have all kinds of success, and we're not going to have any success. So that's the way we're going to work them, is bottom up. And we were fortunate that we had a very small group of RCMP like enlisted guys that were very good at their trade craft and working with us. And they helped us out enormously in Frozen Timber, setting up surveillances on their side of the mountains and giving us a heads up when aircraft were in flight and headed our way.
Absolutely. I want to kind of wrap our conversation up. I want to talk about your sons, and specifically Jack.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your sons, because they were kind of miracles from the beginning of how they were born and stuff. And then let's specifically talk about Jack, what happened and what you're doing to turn that tragedy into a triumph.
Yeah, so our sons, Jack and Sam, are fraternal twins. They were born very premature, like at 26 weeks in 1999. Jack was born in Bellingham. He was 1 pound, 12 ounces. And then he was medevac down to Seattle to the NICU. And then my wife was then medevac down in a different helicopter to Seattle. And she hung on to Sam for 3 more days. And then he was born down there. And Sam was 1 pound, 9 ounces. These little guys spent a month and a half in the NICU in Seattle at UW's hospital there, and then they spent a month in a nursery back in our hospital in Bellingham. Truly, it's like a medical miracle, and I look back at 1999 when I was visiting them in the hospital, and I would see like the care and the techniques and medical techniques that they were undergoing, and it's just amazing. And I can only imagine what it's like, present day, improvements and all of that medical science and with premature children. But these were they grew up to be very active boys, skiers, and riding bikes, playing in the woods, playing Army. Jack was always leaned towards all things military, military gear, all of my law enforcement gear, anything he could get his hands on, he was playing and using. His brother Sam was kind of more into trains and that kind of thing, but Jack was always into the Army, military type stuff. And even to the point when, airsoft became a big thing, when he was a teenager, he was like big time into airsoft, and he'd go off like on Saturdays into the woods with like all these people that would show up at these meetups, and even if it was raining, and they'd like airsoft and battle it out for hours, and he'd always come home, wet and shivering and with a smile on his face. He's a good kid, funny kid too, very saw humor in a lot of things. I remember, so he grew up in like this post 9/11 world, right? Born in 1999, grew up around a lot of law enforcement people. A lot was being said about, radical Islamic terrorists and whatnot. And he was paying attention, and he kind of had an eye for all that kind of stuff. But he graduated from high school. We had moved to Bend, Oregon, and he's going to the community college with his brother Sam and Jack. The community college has an Army ROTC program that they share with Oregon State University, and Jack was an uncommitted freshman in ROTC, and I would say that he came back from like his first FTX, again, dirty, wet, cold, shivering, with a big smile on his face. And he's like, oh man, he goes, I definitely want to go infantry, that's what I want to do. And so he was getting a taste of what he envisioned for himself. He'd always ask me about, so what does it take to be like on the SWAT team, or like, Dad, you were on the special response team, in customs. And I'm like, yeah, well, you have to start at the bottom. You have to start as, a special agent or a police officer and work your way into that special unit. You don't just start there. And so he's like, okay. And I think he chose the military path. He was influenced by, I think, a lot of what he was seeing, in the movies. He was interested like in Vietnam history, it seemed like the Vietnam movies, whether Apocalypse Now or then he was seeing Generation Kill and all that stuff. And I think it all like influenced him. And so getting that ROTC experience kind of put the icing on the cake for him. And then one day he's like, yeah, I want to be a Marine. And we're like, oh, really? We thought you were going to go Army. He's like, no, I want to be in the Marines. And so we're like, okay, and, our attitude was that, my wife and I, our attitude was that, hey, we're going to fully support you in whatever dream you're chasing. It kind of has to fit, the parameters of what I call the meal deal. And I learned the meal deal from an RCMP officer. That means it's moral, ethical, affordable, and legal. If whatever you're doing fits those parameters, we're going to support you. So he enlisted as a private, and we were happy for him. He was following his dream. He was going to be he was the first Ostrovsky in the U.S. military, because we started in the U.S. with my dad arriving here. Although his great grandfather and grandfather were in the Navy and the Army, so he was following in their footsteps, and chose his path, which was Marine Corps infantry. Graduated from recruit training with the honor platoon, shot rifle expert. As expected, he was always a big shooter. We'd always go shooting together. And went to the School of Infantry. When you have an infantry contract with the Marine Corps, you go to the School of Infantry, but then they zero in whether you're going to be a rifleman or a mortarman or whatever. And so he got his 0311 designation at the School of Infantry, exactly what he wanted, which he wanted to be a rifleman. And then we thought it was fortuitous that he was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, because they're known as the China Marines. And when my dad was living in Tianjin, China, that's where the China Marines were based. U.S. Marines were in China. So my dad, put a big smile on his face because he remembered as a boy seeing U.S. Marines in the area that he lived in, and now his grandson was one of those Marines. So all seemed to be going well. Jack was assigned to the mechanized company, which essentially rides in AAVs as embarked troops, which was kind of sad for him and us, because his 2 best buddies went over to the small boat company, and Jack being a very able swimmer, and he had learned to surf, felt very comfortable in and around the water. So it was kind of disappointing that he wouldn't be in the small boat company. So, yeah, I mean, he loved being a Marine, and we loved that he loved being a Marine.
Well, I want to ask you something about the AAV. You had some conversations with him, and we're going to get into like the last time that you actually get to talk to him and see him. But a week before the accident, Jack stated that AAVs sink all the time and that they were actual floating coffins.
Yeah, he said that to me, and I was shocked. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean they sink all the time? If they sink all the time, then they're not going to be using them. Like it just didn't make sense to me what he was talking about. And frankly, I didn't know shit about AAVs. I know go fast boats and I know helicopters. Like I know nothing about uh, military equipment, especially like mechanized equipment. So, and then what he said to me, which I haven't said to many people, was he said if I ever get trapped in one, he goes, I'm gonna shoot and kill myself. And I was like, whoa, 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 like slow down. What are you talking about? Like getting trapped in one. I'm like, you're a good swimmer. You're very comfortable in the water. I'm like, if something happens, you do what you know to do best, and you swim on out of there or whatever. Like so. I was kind of shocked that he had said that about shooting himself, and what I subsequently came to find out was that there was an incident in Iraq where an AAV went off a bridge into a river, and 4 Marines were trapped in it. And when the AAV was subsequently recovered, it was found that they had shot themselves. So I guess that was some kind of story passed down, through the Marines, over time. And that was his reference to shooting himself. And then I was like, well, how are you going to shoot yourself? Because like you guys don't have ammo. He's like, oh no, he goes, I'm going to steal a bullet. I'm going to have a bullet with me all the time.
Okay. So you love him being a Marine. He loves being a Marine. You hear this, though, it's got to change your whole outlook on what's going on because that's his unit. It's not the small boats. It's not. That is the unit. He will be in those all the he will be in those all the time. So I've got to understand what you're thinking as a father hearing that and how you're going to move forward with this because that's a pretty eye-opening thing to say.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd prefer that he not be in that unit. I prefer that he'd be in the small boats, or he'd be in Charlie Company, which would ride in Ospreys, which has become another story as well. But for many families, but so yeah, I was concerned. But he was telling me that they were training. Uh, he told me that yeah, we're supposed to go do the Dunker. There's like an AV simulator, and I was like, okay, so it appears he's going to get trained as much as they need to be embarked troops in their vehicles. I do remember at one point I asked him, I said, did you get to do the Dunker? And this was because that was like a requirement for them, that there's like this AAV simulator that they drop into the pool and it rolls over and then they open the door and they swim out. And he didn't immediately answer me. And there was like a pregnant pause. And he said, we did the chair. And I was like, okay. And then he kind of moved on and started talking about something else. And, what I came to find out was that his entire company essentially did not go through the AAV simulator, through the Dunker. They had put them in what they call a shallow water egress trainer, which is like a beach chair type thing that you put in the shallow end of a pool and you flip it over and you practice like undoing a 6-point harness. It's really more relative to flying in a Black Hawk.
Aircraft. Yeah.
Yeah, flying an aircraft. I mean, I had done it because I had done water survival with CBP Air and Marine, and we did the shallow water egress trainer, so I was familiar with that. But we would hear from him regularly on the weekends, and they were training. They went to 29 Palms and did a bunch of infantry training, live fire, because that's where they do all the live fire. He said that he had ridden some AAVs on land, and he thought that was thrilling, to have the hatches open and be, standing up on the benches, with his rifle. And we saw him the last time was in March of 2020 when we drove his pickup truck down to him at Camp Pendleton. The three of us drove down there to bring him his pickup truck and some other things and visit with them. And then that's when COVID was popping off. So we didn't know if we'd be able to fly home, what was going to happen with domestic flights. So, we cut our trip 2 days short and we flew home. And that's the last time we ever saw him other than, via FaceTime.
Right. So July 27th, that's the last time you speak with him.
Yeah.
He says that they're getting ready to go to the USS Somerset and they're going to do training. Now, going back to what he told you, does this raise any concerns with you, or are you thinking 29 Palms went okay, all the other training went okay? Does this bring any kind of hesitation or thought into your mind?
I would say not. I mean, he was super excited. We had talked about, wow, this is the pre-deployment training evolution, because they were going to go on deployment in the fall. There was word that they would be going all the way to the Persian Gulf and or Australia, or he was excited. We were excited for him. It was like, all right, this is the next step. You're going on pre-deployment training. I remember prior to that, he was talking to my wife and I about going skydiving and starting to work on his skydiving license. And we were like, no, don't do it. If you break your leg and you miss deployment, that's one of the things that, you build your career with. And, don't do something like that essentially outside of work that's going to interfere with work. So we talked him out of that. So, he's very focused on getting to deployment, and this was part of it, going on the Somerset and learning how to live aboard ship and operate from a ship. So, the thing is that, he made that comment and I quite didn't understand it because I didn't have the context of the true story of the AAV in the river in Iraq. So, I just didn't have that piece of information. And frankly, it's a professional military organization. My expectations were high, and my expectations were high of the officers and the senior NCOs.
So from what you know now, walk us through the night of the 30th.
I'll walk you through it chronologically. So the night of the 30th, I'm actually doing this because a friend of mine and I were going to start up a podcast, and we were recording an introductory episode. And when we finished recording, we were still online, and we flipped over. I told my friend, I'm like, yeah, flip over to marinetraffic.com. You can see where the USS Somerset is and the other ships during training, because when they're near shore in the U.S., they're using their AIS, which is this automated identification system. So it's like a transponder. You can see the ships. So I could see the Somerset and see where it was, and this is in the evening, and so the next morning, so I have no idea that basically what had happened that day. What I did not know, and so what had actually happened that day was his company, which was Bravo Company, was doing a mechanized raid on San Clemente Island. Jack and his company boarded the ship down at the docks in San Diego and rowed the ship up off of San Clemente. The AAVs splashed from the Del Mar boat basin at Camp Pendleton, and essentially they call it swimming out to the ship. And I think it was a package of 12 of them swam out to the ship. En route, one of them broke down, and its propulsion broke, and they had to use what's called water tracks. It's like a they use the tracks like a paddle wheel, which is I can't understand how they would get much purchase in the water with that, but I guess that does give them some purchase and forward propulsion. So when the tracks came to the ship, one of them broke down. So on the morning of the 30th, they're doing the mechanized raid. They're going to splash with the tracks. Now, that being said, this is the first time that Bravo Company, that the embarked troops have ever been in an AAV in the water. Typically, they're supposed to do a course where the troops will ride in the back, and the AAV crewmen who drive it, who are the mechanics, who are the navigators, splash the AAVs like into the water from the beach, and then they swim down the beach and they splash back out. So at least they get some time and training, in the water, and the embarked troops get to know what it's like to ride in one in the water. So that morning, they have to leave one AAV on the ship because one had broken down. So the AAVs, I think it's 11 of them, splash. They make it to San Clemente Island. And the splash and the swim is not too far. Like, they basically put them in the water not too far outside the harbor on the west side. That's how they typically do it. And they did their mechanized raid. They're supposed to basically splash back in the water and go back to the ship at 11 a.m. with an arrival at the ship by noon. Well, while on the island, one of the AAVs throws a hub, breaks down. So it's decided to try to fix it. There's a delay. They're waiting for parts to come from the Somerset via an LCAC, a landing craft air cushion. It's going to bring them some parts to fix this hub on this one vehicle. Hub can't be fixed. They don't have the parts. So the vehicles run I believe it's in threes. So it is decided, the company commander, the embarked troops, and then the platoon commander for the AAVs, they decide to leave, two AAVs on the island with a broken down one. The company commander stand behind. Some other senior NCOs are stand behind, and they're going to send the rest of the AAVs, which is 8 of them, I think, back to the ship. But there's continued delays. So now noon turns into 1, 1 turns into 2, 2 turns into 3 o'clock. Then it's 4 o'clock. Sea state's increasing, winds are increasing, and it is decided at that point that the AAVs will splash and swim back to the ship. That being said, the ship is no longer near the outside of the harbor. It is way offshore. And so this column of AAVs head back to the ship. Jack's AAV, which is a track, they call them tracks. Track 5 is the third from the back in the column. And the other 2 AAVs that are part of and they don't call it a flight, but maybe it's a float. The other 2 that his AAV is running with are behind him. Well, one of those AAVs breaks down. The last AAV puts them into tow and starts towing them back to the island. Breaks down, no propulsion. Starts towing them back to the island. Jack's AAV is now the last AAV, and they continue following the others. And at a certain point, Jack's AAV starts taking on water. It loses its ability to operate its bilge pumps because it had a transmission leak that on the island they discovered the leak, but they didn't put enough transmission fluid into the vehicle. So if the transmission fails to work, then the hydraulic bilge pumps start to fail to work. So basically Jack's AAV loses propulsion, loses its ability to pump out water, and they're taking on water because the AAV's leaking. It's got one of its headlights is apparently installed backwards, so the gasket's not keeping any water out. The plenums, which is like the air intake, which takes in air to the engine but keeps water out. The plenum seal is failing and taking in water. And so they are essentially floundering in the ocean as all of these other AAVs in front of them are continuing to the ship. And nobody sees them. And nobody hears them on the radio. The radios aren't working. The AAV that's being towed back to the island, what we come to find out subsequently that apparently that AAV was sinking too, because when they tried to pull it out at the beach, the tow line snapped. So as an experienced mariner, I know what causes vessels to become very heavy. It's water weight. So apparently that AAV was going to sink as well. And it didn't. They got it partially up onto the beach. But Jack's AAV is basically abandoned. It's left adrift. The AAV commander, which is different than the infantry platoon commander that's on board, he starts waving with the November flag. It's like a white and blue checkered flag, which is a way for them to signal distress. They also have flares that they can use to signal distress. But the vehicle commander is using the signal flag instead of the flares for like 25 minutes. But there's nobody to see him waving the flag because basically all of the other AAVs are turned they're going in opposite directions. They're not looking backwards. And the ship is so far away that they can't see the November flag. They apparently were doing flight ops. So they typically have a rear lookout on the back of the ship that looks rearward. They had to secure that lookout because you can't do helicopter flight ops with somebody in the back of the ship. So essentially, this guy's waving, this Marine's waving the November flag for 25 minutes where nobody would see it. It's tantamount to basically trying to make a cell phone call with a dead cell phone. Doesn't use his flares, which, I'm an experienced mariner. When you're just in distress in the maritime environment, you use flares. You don't wave a flag because flares can be seen at a great distance. I've worked on Navy ships and other large vessels. When you're on the bridge, you can see quite a distance, and the lookouts on the bridge wings can see flares at any distance, because that's their job, is to be a lookout, especially when you're doing aviation flight operations. Aviators are always looking for traffic, looking for things in the air. So they would have seen the flares. So, a lot of time was wasted, and this AAV was taking on more and more water when the water gets to what they call the deck plate, which is the floor inside of the AAV, to that level, you're supposed to drop your gear and put on your LPUs and get ready to evacuate. That wasn't done. Apparently water was at knee and then thigh level, and they still had all of them inside the vehicle with the hatches closed, and vessel commander still waving the flag, not ordering an evacuation from the vessel. Ultimately, when one of the AAVs got back on the ship, one of those AAV crew turned around and he saw the flag in the distance. And at that point, two other AAVs turned around and went to try to assist them.
So I'm just wondering, not to interrupt, but I'm wondering why, as they're taking this on, they know it's a complete systems failure. The flag is not working. Did you ever find out why the evacuation wasn't called for? I mean, essentially, you're in a non-working ship, completely non-working ship.
Yeah, and then we know, especially if you're a mariner, you know that life preserver units are made to keep you afloat on the surface of the ocean. And, so when you have 16 people in the ocean together with their yellow LPUs inflated, that makes a big visual target.
Because there
Nobody's,
should be a strobe too.
yeah, I don't know if they have strobes, but it makes for a big visual target, especially when you're all grouped up together, locked in arms, floating on the surface with yellow LPUs. Easy to spot from the air, easy to spot at a distance as you see that group of Marines, cresting waves and going down waves. Nobody was going to drown if they were put in the water. That's completely absurd and a farce. But apparently that was the mentality, was that the safest place for them to be was to stay in the vehicle, which to me, it doesn't compute, because when the vehicle starts to sink, where's that next intermediate point? Where's the intermediate point of safety? There is none. You're essentially in a vehicle that's sinking and going underwater. So what happened was one of the AAVs that turned around that came back to assist them, at that point, there was about 3 inches of freeboard on their AAV, and they had opened the hatches. They were taking waves through the hatch into the vehicle, and one of the AAVs that came back to try to do a troop transfer, like a side-to-side troop transfer, bumped them as they came alongside or approached them, and put track 5, sideways into the swell, and then a huge swell washed into the vehicle, washed a few of the embarked Marines that were already on the top, out the hatch, and the vehicle sank. It just immediately sank with the hatch open. The AV driver, and I heard his testimony at one of the boards of inquiry, he was like a high school swimmer. It was his background. So he was actually trapped inside the driving station. He couldn't open his hatch to get out, because like the driver, the commander have their own hatches. The infantry, the platoon commander also has his own hatch, but the driver could not open his hatch. So he actually sunk with the vehicle. And as he testified, he swam out, because there's a little passageway where he can go from his position into where the embarked troops are. And he swam out and stated that, he encountered, Marines, boots in his face, and Marines and people. And, as he was swimming out, he reached, because he's familiar with the LPUs, the pull cord or the activation cord has like beads on them. He grabbed a couple of LPUs and found the beads and pulled the LPUs and swam out. That being said, he was able to do like a free ascent to the surface, and he suffered like a partial drowning, survived, was found on the surface. But Jack and 8 others, they were subsequently found. The vehicle was subsequently found by a deep sea ROV that the Navy has, and hatch open, and Jack and the 8 others were actually on the ocean floor with their LPUs inflated and all their gear on, some of them with rifles still slung around their necks. What we know about those LPUs is that when you go, on the surface, they'll give you like 70 pounds of buoyancy. So you can still have some of your kit on, and it'll give you buoyancy. If you don't have any kit, it's awesome buoyancy on the surface. But then, if you're 20 feet underwater, it cuts its buoyancy in half. And the deeper you go, it just doesn't, they don't work. So that's why they were found on the ocean floor with their LPUs inflated. Somehow they got out of the vehicle, and they just probably were unable to swim to the surface because they still had so much gear on and not enough buoyancy. So yeah, he drowned with the others.
When you find out, because you don't find out until the next day.
Yeah.
And I think a neighbor tells you, is that correct?
Yeah. So it's the next day is Friday. I was off that day because had a job that I was doing at the community college, and the summers we have Fridays off, and I'd go hiking with my wife on Fridays. We'd always go hiking, and in the morning, and as we were en route to our hike, our neighbor called my wife on the mobile phone and said, "Hey, there's a thing in the news about an AAV sinking off of San Clemente Island." We're like, "Oh shit, that's Jack's company," and we knew he was doing that mechanized raid on Thursday. So we're like, "Oh man, what do we do? Who do we call?" And I had met the battalion chaplain when Jack reported to 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, because he reported the day he graduated from the School of Infantry, and the battalion commander had invited us over to their building for, like a family brief. So I'd met the chaplain, and I still had his number in my mobile phone. I called him, and he had told me that he was no longer with the battalion, but he was aware of the accident or the incident. We talked about the whole concept of like no news is good news, and certainly anybody that passed away yesterday, because there were some Marines that had died. Or there was a Marine that died, that night, found on the surface, and he was deceased. And the chaplain told me certainly that notification's already been made to the family. So there are some Marines that are missing, and probably those notifications will come, later today. But he was like, "Yeah, no news is good news." So my wife and I decided that, well, instead of just sitting home and worrying, let's just go for a walk, and we went for a hike. And the other thing was the chaplain said that he was familiar with Jack's name, and I didn't know how to take that, whether he meant like he was involved, or because we have such a unique last name that he was familiar with Jack's last name. But so we did this hike, and we're up on this like small mountain where we have cell service, and we called a couple family members to tell them that there was an accident, and it was Jack's company, and we don't know what's going on, but we'll let them know as soon as we know something. And as we're hiking down, Sam, our other son, calls my wife and says, "Hey, there were 2 Marines at our front door, and they were looking to talk to your mom. And I gave them your phone number, and they said that they were going to call you." When I heard that, I just couldn't believe it. I was cursing the world, and then the phone rang, and it was the first sergeant from the Reserve Center here in Springfield, Oregon. Said he needed to talk to us, and we told them, we're like, "Well, we're an hour from the house, and if you came from Springfield, you drove right by where we're hiking, so we need to catch up to you, so we'll see you in an hour." And he came to the house and told us what happened, and that Jack and 8 others were missing, and they were under duty status unknown. He'd be our contact all the way through this thing, and so we talked a bit, and they left, him and his partner, and so he was the full-time first sergeant that runs the Reserve Center. Super nice guy, former air traffic controller, also had been an embassy Marine security guard detachment as well. So, and then the next morning then that day we called all our family and started notifying close friends that Jack was missing, and I told Lynn, I was like, "Yeah, if he got to the surface, he's fine. He's out there floating somewhere, but if he's still missing and they have this large search underway, if he's trapped inside, then he's dead. There's no doubt about that." And next morning, the first sergeant came back to the house and told us that the commanding general had called off the search, and that they were all being declared deceased. And then, kind of started from there. He was our casualty calls assistance officer, and, the process started. The process is paperwork, forms to fill out, Q&A,
Let me ask you a question. Whenever you hear that they called off the search, we're 2 days in, correct?
Yeah. The vehicle sank Thursday at like 6 p.m. So now we're talking Saturday.
With everything that you've done in your career, the lengths that you've gone to find what you needed to find, to search out people that you wanted to find, hearing that they call off the search, can you talk about how you felt?
That was a reality for me. I knew that if he made it to the surface and he was alive, he would have been found by now, because they had it was a massive search, all kinds of Coast Guard aircraft, Navy aircraft, Marine aircraft, vessels. I mean, I could look on marine traffic and see like a gazillion vessels out there that were searching, and some of them were like commercial fishing boats, whatever. I knew that they've called off the search because they can't find them because they're underwater. And then we got some preliminary information that one Marine made it to the surface and died. Some of the crew were on the surface and injured, partial drownings. Jack's Jack's fire team leader, he was another like a partial drowning guy, and then nobody else was seen coming to the surface. That was a reality that, it's time to call off the search. They're not going to survive in 50-degree water, and they would have been found by now.
So how do you go forward with all this information? There's got to be a million questions on your mind. There's got to be that you want answers and stuff. What do you do to gain closure on this?
Well, I have to say that it was pretty rough, because we thought he was still trapped in the vehicle. We came out to find out subsequently that they were found on the ocean floor. So all along, I didn't know that the hatch was open, right? I know now that the hatch was open, but I did not know that the hatch was open. So I had not told Lynn, my wife, that Jack had told me that he'd shoot himself if he was ever trapped in one of those vehicles. So here we are for months. I'm thinking, I wonder if he killed himself. I wonder if he executed his plan. A lot happened before we found out the cause of death. August 8th, we go down there to Camp Pendleton to this unofficial memorial on the beach. We meet with a bunch of the Marines and people from his company, and we meet with Jack's roommate, and we go to breakfast with him and some people, or some Marines that he was close to. And then we fly to Dover, Delaware, because that's where the military has the mortuary, right, for a dignified transfer of all of them, once they were recovered. We were in that period of time, the ROV showed up. We were told the vehicle is recovered off the ocean floor. Your sons were recovered. But we didn't realize, in the way that this personnel casualty report was written, was that they meant that he was outside the vehicle. We thought it meant that, okay, they recovered the vehicle and they were all in the vehicle. But actually, if you read the PCR, and if you read it a different way, you realize, he was outside the vehicle with the others. We go to Dover. Before they do the transfer off the C-17, they use the term distinguished visitors. We're over at the Fisher House, which is a foundation that supports families during these tragedies, and they have all these facilities around bases around the world that, receiving a loved one, or they wait there, or they meet, whether it's the president or the secretary of defense or whatnot. They meet them in that facility. So the distinguished visitors show up. It's the commandant of the Marine Corps. It's Secretary of the Navy, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, Deputy Defense Secretary, the Chairman, Mike Milley, Joint Chiefs of Staff is there. A bunch of different people, their spouses as well, accompany them. And so we meet with them, and then we go out to the ramp, and then we watch them being brought off and loaded up into the vehicles, and they take them to the mortuary. So, we did that. That's like August 12th. August 21st, we go back to Camp Pendleton for the unit memorial, which really sucks because that's Sam's 21st birthday. So, Sam on his 21st birthday is at his brother's unit memorial, and which was like a massive showing and very, very well done. The commandant was there, but I didn't speak to him. But I have to tell you that something happened at that unit memorial that kind of showed me the spirit of the Marine Corps, and it's probably the same in the Army. How they honor their fallen brothers and sisters is so they have the unit memorial on the big helicopter ramp, big wide open space. They've got tents set up, and they have these portraits on easels for the 9 of them, and there's a battlefield cross with their rifle and their helmet and dog tags and other displays, and that's at Camp Pendleton at what they call Camp Horno. Well, that's the English way of saying Orno, which Orno is camp oven, and the reason why it's called camp oven is because it's always hot there behind the mountains, and there's never a breeze. And so we're there at the memorial, and company commanders speaking, battalion commanders speaking, chaplains speaking, and all of a sudden the wind gusts up and blows all those easels down, flags down, colors down, everything's like on the ground. And it's like the entire company of Marines behind us, without even being told, just comes running out onto the ramp and grabs the displays, and basically now they are the easels, for the entire unit memorial. So that really spoke to me when I saw that. After the unit memorial, Jack's battalion commander came up and spoke with us, and we hadn't met him before, other than previously when Jack had reported to the battalion, but briefly. And we're walking with him. We're kind of heading over to this tent to get a refreshment, and there was just something. He was very nervous, obviously, and you can only imagine how nervous you'd be if you were responsible for a battalion, and then 9 of your people are lost and people are injured, seriously injured. But I sensed something was up, and he starts telling us about the AAVs and that there's an investigation underway, and that he has to ride in an AAV too, so he wants to get to the bottom of what happened. And he says to Lynn and I, he goes, I have no idea why that vehicle would have sunk. And I just it just didn't sit right with me. You know it is. We're cops. We've interviewed a gazillion people, and when people say certain things, it just doesn't seem right. What I come to find out, months later, is that, oh yeah, he had plenty of idea as to why that AAV sank. It's in the investigation. They received vehicles that were essentially like on the deadline lot. Poor conditioned AAVs, classified as poor. They were having trouble getting them working, and They had never trained with him in the water. The first time that the company was in the water in an AAV was off the ship, which is like absurd to think that that would be the first time that you would even introduce water, And so, I'm looking at this investigation and I'm like, yeah, I mean, he knew. He knew. And even in his statement, he was trying to get them repaired and was running into trouble because the AAVs actually belonged to an AAV unit, an AAV battalion. And there were some difficulties between the infantry and the mechanized battalion. And I don't know. The interesting thing is that there was plenty of opportunities, and you could see it in the investigation, to do more training, even do it as dry land training. When they lost the ability to put all their people through the dunker and the pool, they could have just done it on dry land, which practice on how to egress and go through the protocols, out of an AAV. But they didn't do it, So I'm like thinking to myself, how is it that a guy like me that doesn't know shit about AAVs can kind of figure out how to do AAV training, when there's like barriers and to doing the training the way you're supposed to do it. Like, where's the imagination, the creativity? So yeah, it's just very disappointing, and it's very ironic that the China Marines, their motto is whatever it takes. And I saw in this investigation, and the first investigation, the second, they didn't live up to their own motto. They just didn't. And that's how this tragedy happened, was, it's lack of professionalism, complacency. A bunch of people got killed. A bunch of Marines and a sailor got killed.
So what are you doing to help the future of this?
Well, I've testified before the House Armed Services Committee's subcommittee on readiness regarding this incident. I think you'll understand this, DJ, is that I very much care about Marines, but I'm not very happy with the Marines because of this incident. So
I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So, I wouldn't call myself like I'm not out to get them, but this can't happen like this again. Not like this, because this was like a total disaster. Top down. You have a battalion commander that really lacked situational awareness the day of the exercise. I know that, in federal law enforcement, if my people were doing something that was high risk and I didn't hear from them, or they were delayed and delayed again and delayed again, I would assume a more engaged posture, and it just seems that a lot of people in that battalion were kind of like disengaged. And, what we've come to find out is that these AAVs, they didn't have to use poor conditioned AAVs. There were some AAVs that were in better condition. There were AAVs from the prior Marine Expeditionary Unit that they could have used those, that were basically probably in good or very good condition. They didn't have to use poor condition vehicles. So they just didn't do enough. Many of them just kind of fell down on the job. I'm not going to say that I'm a watchdog, but, like, I have a lot of skin in the game. I think all taxpayers should be upset or that, America was sending, poor condition vehicles, essentially to the Middle East of Africa to be part of like America's maritime response force. I think we expect more as taxpayers, but, I have what I would say more skin in the game because, I lost a family member.
Absolutely. What can people do in general to help out, though? What if you could say one thing to the people, like, this is what I wish you could do to help out this situation? Maybe not necessarily your son or anyone in particular, but help out this situation.
Yeah, well, we have a representative form of government, so, you need to engage with your senators and congressional representatives and talk to them and tell them that, things like this are unsatisfactory. and put the pressure on, because really our senators and our representatives, they hold the purse strings, for everything that the
Absolutely.
federal government does in the military.
Absolutely.
So, you have to work through our process, and so I've been active with that, in touch with our representatives and senator, and so have been some of the other families. I was asked to go on 60 Minutes. I was interviewed by Leslie Stahl, and along with one of the other families, and we talked about it. It's a death and training episode that 60 Minutes did, not just on the AAVs, but on Humvee rollovers and other wheeled vehicle rollover incident. So yeah, you just have to be engaged. Like I could withdraw from society, I guess, withdraw from life, isolate myself. But the reality is that, I have a lot of life to live for, and, my family is counting on me. We all love each other, and we still have a lot of life to live. And, the thing is that, we don't get over the things that traumatize us ever. And you have to learn to coexist with the trauma. You have to use more self-discipline to basically keep yourself on track. Trauma's a part of life, and it'll affect people at some point, or not, or it'll affect somebody that you love. Talking about it and talking about how I'm dealing with it helps me, but then I can also help others that go through the same thing. I've connected with some of the families from the Kabul bombing. I actually went to 5 of the funerals with a foundation that brought 50 Marines to Jack's funeral, and I helped them bring Marines to actually 7 of the Kabul funerals, and I went to 5 with them to do law enforcement agency coordination, force protection for them. So, yeah, but I was ready to stand on the sidelines, and I've done my career, done everything I wanted to do professionally, and ready to stand on the sidelines and watch Jack, become a man, become the Marine that he wanted to be.
Well, I definitely think that this, in a strange way, is maybe your new purpose in life. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know any other way to say it. I can't imagine being a father, what you've gone through. I can only hope that this helps you help others.
Whenever and wherever I can, I will, you know, um, because nobody should have to go through this. No family should have to go through what we've been through. But if they do, I can help them, and I know that there is a path to joy, after this trauma, and I've learned some of these things because I participated in a program. It's called the Post Traumatic Winning Program. It's online by the same name. It's run by a retired Marine major who's become a good friend of mine, and he runs a non. I would call him a trauma coach. It's like a non-clinical program that teaches you some commandments, things that you need to do, and goals to have to put yourself on the path to having a joyful life again. And then what you learn, you can help others. So yeah, that's where I find myself. I guess that's my purpose.
And I think that's a great way to end the conversation that we're having tonight. One other thing from you, where can people find you, find out more of your story? Of course, we'll put it on the website, our website, but is there anywhere that they can find you on Instagram, Facebook, anything like that where people can find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's at Peter O 1811, or Peter O 1811. 1811s. That's our federal criminal investigator job series. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. If you search my name, I'm writing a book. It'll probably take me a while to finish it, but I realized that I've learned a lot of lessons through my career and through what's happened to me after my career. So, I'm working on that. So you may see that someday.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Pete, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's your story from not only your career, but everything that's happened after it is absolutely amazing. And I'm so honored that you came on here and gave your story. Guys, that's going to be the conversation tonight. If you want more of me, you can always find me on Facebook at the DTD Podcast. You can find me on YouTube at the DTD Podcast, where all these videos are in conversation form and video form. You can also find me on Instagram at the DTD_podcast. Don't forget, though, DTDpodcast.net. That's going to be your one-stop shop for this show. It's got the audio, the video. Pete has sent me tons of pictures to add on to his episode page. That you'll get to take a look at him. You'll get to take a look at Jack. You'll get to look at everything that was happening during his career and after it. You can also find all of the links that he talked about and where you can find him directly. Also, guys, don't forget, go to our sponsor at Police Coffee, policecoffee.com. Remember, we're a police-owned business, and we're dedicated to crafting the finest coffees and blends. They're shipped as soon as they're made to provide you with the freshest coffee available. Each batch is roasted fresh by people who know what it means to stay vigilant, and the specialty coffees do not waste one drop when flavor is concerned. The coffee is some of the best you'll find, but it also serves an important cause, giving back to the community. Remember, 50% of the profits go towards helping family members of police officers who fell in the line of duty. Don't forget to go to them, policecoffee.com, and when you put in your order, put the code DJK10 for 10% off your order. Once again, guys, go to dtdpodcast.net, check out everything that happened this week, and look for us in the future episodes. Pete, thank you so much again for coming on. That's going to be the show this week, guys. That's Pete. I'm DJ. This has been the show. We'll catch you guys on the next one. See you later.